Hey everybody. So we're now into topic 6 for BCOR 360, and we're talking about process design and improvement, right? So let's go ahead and dive into this chapter. So let's see here. All right, you should see now My Educator, which is our learning system here. So when we go into what is a process, well, what do you think is a process? Our book uses making your bed, lifting weights, or going running. All these different things is a process. You have an input, an operation, and an output. That's essentially what a process is. So think about it. What in your life has an input, an operation, and an output? Could be doing your laundry. Could be driving to class. It could be driving to work. Could be work. Your work, if you do work, has lots of processes. Whether it's, clocking in or clocking out, or you have to go into certain computer systems to do the work. Could be something like you take stuff from the back room and you put it up on the shelf and recycle the cardboard. All those are different processes because you need to have that input. The operation is actually putting it on the shelf, and your output is that final product of having the things on the shelf, or clean laundry, or getting paid because you did the clock in and clock out. So all these different things apply to processes, or are processes. So let's look at the processes as stories. So we have a beginning, right? The story has a beginning. Once upon a time is how most fairy tales start, and then once upon a time there was a princess, right, or a prince, or whatever you want to call it, and make up your own fairy tale. So we have our inputs. We get to know the characters of our story. In the middle, everything starts to flow together. We see the interactions of the characters. And then we have the outputs, and they lived happily ever after. Not everything is a fairy tale. I mean, we do live in the real world, right? But we get to learn all this stuff. And we can apply this if we think of it this way. So our characters are those resources. Those are what becomes used in our operation. Because a story without the resources, or without the plot, the characters, the beginning, middle, and end, it's not a story. You're going to feel kind of let down. But we also have that plot, which is our structure of the story. If you've gone through a writing class and you did creative writing, you might have had, an introduction to a story, a short story that you wrote. Then you built up to that climax. The climax happens, and then you kind of have everything coming together at the end. Everybody's happy. You find out, the hero of the story rides off into the sunset and goes off to save somebody else. Movies are the same way, but our book is using a story, and we need to think of it this way because it helps understand this topic. And if you look at it from a story point of view, I would say all of you probably had required reading coming up the grades all the way through high school, and maybe even summer reading. So you had to read certain books. I remember I had to read To Kill a Mockingbird. I think I had to read Watership Down. All these different books that the schools use to teach you a lesson, usually a life lesson. Some books are better than others. I think Huckleberry Finn is now not recommended reading anymore because of how it portrays certain characters. But that's our times. So when you think of stories, think of our operation process, because it is a process. Inputs, operation, outputs, and our resources are what we use for our inputs. And the plot, or our characters are the resources, our plot is that structure. Think of that plot as the flow of that operation. So that is a process in a nutshell. Now, feel free to reach out to me and we can talk one-on-one and we can dive more into this. But what about designing our process? So our book uses a 5 different levels of processes based on their complexity. So we have our most complex, which is our projects and our job shops. Think of a project. Like right now, our college is getting a new building. That is a project. As we learned from topic 5, projects are, one-time things. They're unique. They have a defined beginning and a defined end. And there's so much planning that goes into it, and then we have to manage what's actually happening. Then we have to execute and control, and then finally we have our closing, right? So think about this, think about the complexity, because we're looking at how much we can produce versus the product variability. So think about that when we're talking about process design, because the more complex or more variety there is, variation, the more of process intensive it is. So we have our project. That's our number one complex thing. But the next step down is a job shop. So you can think of automotive services. No 2 cars are going to be treated the same way when they come in. So think about it. Like my car is currently in the shop. It's having some problems. It's been in the shop. This is its second time in the shop for the same thing, and it's been in there for about 3 days now. I'm not happy, but they're taking their time to figure out what exactly is wrong with my car. Just to let you guys know, my car wouldn't start. I jumped it. Once I got done with it, it wouldn't start again. So I have it in the shop trying to figure out what's wrong with the electrical system. My battery's good, so it's got to be something else. But if you think about it, my car's in the shop for an electrical issue. Your car might be in for an oil change. So the complexity of that. Now they're low volume. So like the dealership, for example, they probably do more complex work. But if you just need an oil change, you can go to Jiffy Lube or any other place, and it's almost an assembly line to change the oil. They drain the oil, they change the filter, they do whatever other checks they need to do while the oil is draining. Then they apply a new filter, and then they add oil. It's essentially what they do. But the cars might vary a little bit. For example, if you have a Jeep Wrangler, there might be a protection plate underneath the car because it's meant to be an off-road vehicle, so it has maybe a skid plate on the bottom of it. So the bottom of your car is protected. They might have to unbolt that in order to do the oil change. Or it might be like my car, I have a sedan. It doesn't have any of that. You can pretty much do it. But anyway, so Job Shop is more customized, but it's not completely unique. You might be doing the same thing, just varying it a little bit. So let's say maybe cabinets for a home. The cabinets might be customized enough to fit what you have in your kitchen or your bathroom. There may be some customization there. Right? All right, so let's look at batch. So batch is, let's say, paint. Paint is usually made in batches, or wallpaper. So they mix the colors for wallpaper. They mix colors and they apply it to paper. For paint, they mix all sorts of different chemicals, add some tint, and there's your paint. However, they have different batches. So when you look at wallpaper, for example, there would be usually a lot code or a batch code on the wallpaper. And you want to try to buy stuff from the same lot or the same batch because the color is going to be exactly the same. Same thing with paint. Now, Most of the time nowadays, there's standard white paint, and they just add tint at Home Depot, Lowe's, Sherwin-Williams, wherever you go for paint. They just mix it right there for you. But it could have a slight variation from paint can to paint can. However, it's usually very minor, and most of the time, no one even notices. But if you were to get some scientists to actually analyze the color, they probably say, "Oh, this is completely different because there's more red in it or something." So you can think of that as batches. Uh, what else could be a batch? You can come up with these. Let's say coffee. Let's say you make coffee. You might like coffee strong. And so you make coffee and you add an extra scoop of grounds. But I'm not a coffee drinker, so if I make coffee, I'm going to follow the directions on the can. And it might be too weak for you. There's 2 different batches of coffee, but you might get 10 cups or 12 cups out of a batch, or 8, whatever amount that makes. So you'd have 2 different batches. So there's some uniqueness here. And you can apply this to, let's say, making cookies or cakes or pies, or even making food in general. Have you ever made something and you're like, "Oh, this is awesome," and then you try it again and you can't duplicate that exact same taste? Or you go to a restaurant and you have an awesome meal and you go back and you order the same thing because it was so awesome the first time. Now what? Is it exactly the same? Is it similar? Is it different because a different chef might be working? That's kind of like a batch process. Now, let's move on to assembly line. Now, when most people think of an assembly line, they're thinking of an automotive assembly line. There's cars coming down, usually some type of conveyor system, and things are being put on the car. It could be, one robot might be putting on a door, and another robot on the other side putting on a door. So another one putting on the hood. It could be all these different things happening at the same time. So that's an assembly line. Or if that's all people, they're doing the same thing over and over and over and over. There might be just a little bit of variation, because if you think about it, cars are not exactly the same when you have the same model car. There might be some extra features on one car that's not on another one. So that's why these people who are on assembly lines, they have the skills to realize, oh, this car gets part A, but the next car gets part A and B. So they have that skill to do that. But then we also have continuous flow. So we have a large number of items coming off the line that are exactly the same. Exactly the same. So think of, I would say, noodles, spaghetti, or fettuccine, or whatever kind of noodle. They're exactly the same. The only real difference is how fast is the machine working. And you can tend to get that speed set ideally based on all the other equipment. And we'll talk about bottlenecks and stuff shortly. And your homework is based on bottlenecks. So I might give you a hint on the homework. But for the continuous flow, you don't need high-skilled workers. You might just have workers that are making sure that the machine doesn't break, or the products off the machine don't fall on the floor. They're supposed to stay on a certain spot. Or they get loaded into boxes and they just have to close the boxes and tape them shut. So while these low-skill workers are in this process, they're essential because they're making sure things still work. They're monitoring the equipment. But you want to have higher trained workers, so let's say engineers or quality control or quality assurance, there to make sure the process is being done correctly. Because there's nothing worse than the quality going bad, because now you just have so much product that is scrap or needs rework, which is expensive. On continuous flow, you might just go ahead and throw that stuff out or recycle it or do something with it, because it might not be worth the cost of doing it again or remaking it. So those are the 5 categories when it comes to processes and like their complexity. So we have project, job shop, batch, assembly line, and continuous flow. So that's from the most complex all the way down to the least complex. All right. So let's see here. So I'm doing the. I didn't prep. I'm just going to go ahead and talk through this. Process capacity. Now, everybody has a capacity. For example, yourself. You know how much or how fast you can type, let's say. You have to write a paper. You need to write 10,000 words. Yes, I know that's a lot. There's about 300 words per page typed, single spaced, or no, double spaced. About 300 words. So that's a lot of pages, right? Some of you guys might have had assignments that required that many pages. So that's actually about, what, 33 pages? That's a lot of pages. But you know how fast you can type. You know, if you type 20 words a minute, or you type 50 words a minute, or even 100 words a minute, you know exactly your capacity. What about reading speed? So one thing I found on the, what's it called? The Amazon Kindle app. You can actually use a feature on it, and it will show you one word on the screen at a time, but it will go fast. Now, how fast you can read, you know, how many words per minute, you can actually set the speed. I think you can go up to 1,000 words per minute or down to 50 or something like that. Go ahead and try it if you have that application. So you just pick a book and then go to options. I think it's called Word Runner or something like that. But you can figure out how fast you can read. I tried it, and I can do 650 words a minute. However, my retention or comprehension is not where I want it to be. So I can sit comfortably about 450 words, and I can comprehend what I'm reading. Think about that. 450 words a minute is just mine. You might have more, you might have less. So 450 words a minute, so whatever, 450 divided by 60. So what, that's approximately 8 words a second or so, ballpark. That's pretty quick. That's it's an eighth of a second per word. So you need to learn your capacity with the equipment you have. So how do you figure that out? So we all know quotas, right? You need to do X number in a certain period of time. Well, if you have a quota to make, let's say, 1,000 units an hour, you would just take that 1,000 divided by 60 to get down to minutes or whatever time frame you want, and you can figure that out. But you can look at your equipment and you can find out what its capacity, what its speed is. Let's say that system can do 50 a minute. Well, you can figure out its capacity by doing 50 per minute, multiply that 60 to get it to the hour. So what does that come up to? Like 3,000? That's 3,000 a minute, but your quota is, or 3,000 an hour, but your quota is 1,000 an hour. So that system there, that one machine, that one process has the capacity you're looking for. But you also have excess capacity. Now, we need to also realize if your quota is 1,000 units an hour and you have an 8-hour day, that technically means 8,000 units a day, right? 1,000 times 8, because it's 1,000 units per hour. You have 8 hours, so 1,000 times 8 is 8,000. Do you think that you're going to produce at 8,000 in a day? I'm hoping you're saying no, because when we come into work, we don't instantly hit the ground running, right? We don't just flip a switch, clock in, and start producing at 1,000 an hour. We kind of ramp up to that. But then we kind of ramp down when it comes to breaks or lunch or smoke break, bathroom breaks, whatever the case is. And then we'll ramp back up after those breaks. And then we'll ramp down at the end of the day. Unless, you have a machine that's automated in front of you and you're just an operator of it, you might have someone in that just kind of steps in right where you're at. It's very unlikely you're going to be making $8,000 an hour. So you might plan for $7,500 an hour, $7,500, because that's kind of taken into account the ramping up of the system and the ramping down of your work. So think about that. So we kind of lose some capacity there. That's our effective capacity, what we actually can do on that machine. Now, a lot of machines have what are design capacity. In a perfect world, you'll get the design capacity. So, like, for example, a fire truck usually has a 1,200 gallon per minute pump on that truck. Do you think that that system is going to be operating at 100% if it goes to a fire? It will not. There's several factors that go into that. While that pump has a capacity of that, you have to also consider the water source. So if you think of fire hydrants, their pressure and their capacity is not 1,200 gallons per minute, which is the pump capacity. And if the pump tries to pull that much capacity out, you can actually collapse pipes. So, from my knowledge, fire trucks will usually put out about 600 to 800 gallons per minute because they have that reserve capacity in there in case they do get to let's say, a fire hydrant system that can handle that. Or they have to put it into a standpipe connected to the building. You've seen those things, or the fire department connections on the outside of buildings. Well, that's so they can put water in for the fire sprinklers. But 1,200 gallons per minute is the capacity of the truck. That's their design capacity. But their effective capacity is about half to about 2/3 of that because of the other bottlenecks on the system. Pretty amazing, right? To kind of see this. So on our book here, we have this right here. Effective capacity equals design capacity minus lost production. So this is, like I said, the taking breaks or lunch break, or you're slowing down because your break's coming in a minute or two or 5 minutes or 15 minutes. So you slow down a little. You come back from break, you're not really feeling about working, so you kind of slowly get up to your actual speed that you'll be doing it. So all these things are your lost production. A fire truck, the lost production is the capacity of that fire hydrant system where they're pulling water from. That system might not have the ability to give that much water. So we need to understand effective capacity, and I hope I explained it well enough for you. All right, so let's go ahead and look at process improvement. So we need to look at the theory of constraints. So the theory of constraints here is a simple graphic that we have here. So we have our excuse me, our inventory, our operating expense, and throughput. All these are affected by our theory of constraints. Because if we can lower our inventory, we have less inventory on hand. And also reduce operating expenses, but we increase our throughput. Let's say inventory comes in and it's going out right away because it's being delivered in time to be used. So it's not even sitting on a warehouse shelf. It's not sitting in a storage container. It's just going right from the dock to where it needs to go. All that is going to increase profit for your company, right? So we need to look at theory of constraints. Theory of constraints is we're looking at our constraints and seeing how we can take advantage of these things. We're going to exploit our process. But first, before we get that, we have to understand what a bottleneck is. So on the picture right now, or on the screen right now, we have two bottles, bottle A and bottle B. So it looks like bottle A is some type, maybe an alcohol bottle. It's got a a good base of the bottle, but it's got a thin neck. But then we have bottle B. This looks like a milk bottle. Back when milk bottles were a thing, you had milk delivered to your doorstep. So you have a similar sized base, but the neck, the bottle's neck, is actually bigger. So we think of the non-bottleneck is the base of it. But when liquid is trying to leave these bottles, it has to get through that neck. Hence, bottleneck. It's our constraint. So like that fire engine example I used, the constraint is the fire hydrant system or the source of the water that fire hydrant needs. So we have a couple different ones. We have a physical bottleneck. This is, like the bottles here that are on the screen. We can have a policy bottleneck. Has anybody ever had to get approval from certain people all the way up the chain? That's a bottleneck, because if someone's on vacation and you need their signature before you can go to the next person, your paperwork or your request or whatever it is stuck at that level. So that's a policy bottleneck. And then a partner bottleneck. This is, like you're missing your raw materials because your supplier hasn't delivered them yet. So you can't increase your production because you don't have the materials. So you're relying on your supplier. All right. So now here is something that you should think of when doing the homework. All right. So your homework is, it gives you a scenario, and then there's a proposal on how to resolve the scenario. Okay. First, we need to identify the bottleneck. Your scenario is going to identify the bottleneck. So once you identify it, right? I think the painting station in the example or in the homework is your bottleneck. But then you need to exploit. How are you going to exploit? And it says it right here. Increase the output of the bottleneck. Now I want you to read that proposal and consider this, okay? I'm not going to tell you how to consider it, just consider it. Because the homework is based on essentially these two things, identify and exploit. And then we have subordinate. So you need to look at all the activities and see what you can do with them. What do you need to do to those other activities to help resolve that bottleneck? This could be taking some of the work in progress or work for that bottleneck and maybe shifting it somewhere else. For example, you're looking at your capacity of your system, and your system is, let's say, multiple machines. You may need to consider what the capacity of your bottleneck is. Let's say it's 1,000 units an hour, but your rest of your line can produce at 2,000 units an hour. Well, if your one bottleneck hit its capacity, its effective capacity, well, what do you need to do with that? Do you need to maybe have a second machine because the machine is only half of the other capacity? So if you have two machines running at 1,000 units an hour, then you can actually increase the speed of the rest of the system to be at the 2,000, because now you have 2,000 at your bottleneck. Or another option you can do that most people do not think about is slow down the system. So if your bottleneck can only do 1,000 an hour, there's no sense in doing 2,000 units an hour on all the other parts of the system. All the other processes doing 2,000 units an hour. Bring those down, let's say to 950. And then your bottleneck system can come down to 950, and everything should be moving along as it should, right? That's a possibility. But then you have also to elevate. So if your problem still exists, you need to basically take a look and figure out what is going on still. Because once you fix your bottleneck, you're going to find out there's something else as a bottleneck. There's always a bottleneck. It's just figuring out where it is. So that's part of the repeat process. So think about these things, and especially in your life. You know, you have some bottlenecks in your life. It could be that you have to be somewhere at a certain time. So you're kind of stuck there, right? But the bottleneck might be trying to get down the road because your class might be right at the end of lunch, but everybody's trying to get back to work at end of lunch, and you're trying to drive into campus. So you might be hitting traffic. So there might be one specific street light that's your bottleneck that you just have to go through. You can't go any other routes. Well, what are some options that you have? You can leave earlier, you can leave a little later. Maybe you find a longer route that goes around maybe from the back side. It's up to you to figure these things out. All right. So let's take a look at process mapping. So some of these questions might be on your exam. So we have to define the process, right? What is the start of the process and where is the end of the process? Because we really don't care what's on the other side of those. We need to know what we're looking at. So we need to define that process. And so we need to once we define it, we can understand it. So identifying the process trigger. What starts the process and what ends the process, right? So if you're going to, I don't know, go to Starbucks, get some coffee. Well, what starts that process? Is it when you enter the line and the end of the process is when you receive your coffee and you are walking away? Or is it when you get to the cash register where you order? Where is that starting point? So you need to define that trigger point. It could be your trigger point might be you woke up in the morning. You know, everybody's different. But define those trigger points, right? Identify those key activities. So you would make a process map. That's what this section's about right here. Make the process map. That process map, and using these symbols a little bit below here, we're going to show the flow. How do things move from step to step to step to step? Because we're looking at the overall process, and these little things are kind of like the activities and the operations within the process. And yes, you can have multiple operations within the process because the output of something is going to be the input to something else, right? That's kind of how life works, right? All right. So like I've been mentioning, define the endpoint because you don't want to keep going and going and going and going and going, and you realize you've done way too much work. You've wasted your time. You don't want that. Okay, so let's talk about some of these symbols. Double arrows. That's the start of the process, the actual arrival into the process. Some places use double arrows to kind of indicate that start. But for the test and this book, double arrows indicate the arrival into the process. Single arrows. Most flowcharts have single arrows because it tells you what direction you're traveling on the flowchart. And of course, we need to indicate where the start and end is. So we have ovals. You'll see ovals and use that on the test, oval. But a lot of times you'll see circles and you'll actually see the word start. So oval, circle, essentially the same thing. Don't get some geometry teacher talking about that. But just know that ovals, for the sake of the exam, start the process. And also ovals signify the end of the process. Remember, we have to define the beginning and the end. This is the way to do it. All right, activities. These are rectangles or boxes. So, and usually in there, they say what the activity is. It might be placing order for coffee. You know, if you're going to Starbucks and you want coffee. Order coffee. Could be as simple as that to explain what it is. But it's going to have a lot more detail on the back end of it, you know, about how that process or activity works. But we're just looking at a process map, so we're not diving so deep into this. If we were in industrial engineering, we'd be diving really deep into these. But we're not. Good for you, right? All right. So we have the weight symbol. It's a triangle. Think of it as a yield sign, right? It's just upside down. So at a yield sign, you stop, you check to see if you can go, and then you go. But sometimes at a yield sign, you can go straight on through. You do not wait. But for the purpose of process flow mapping, it's wait. You basically stop the process because you need something to happen that indicates you can continue on. It might be a quality control check. It might be someone is verifying that your order is correct before they yell out your name. Could be anything like that. It could be you're waiting for an approval because you used a credit card and the point of sale system is verifying your card is valid. Could be anything like that. So you're waiting. Think about it as nothing's going on right there. And then finally we have our decision. This is shown as a diamond. So most of the time you'll have usually two decisions here. Yes or no. Usually. So at a diamond, you would look at what is the wording on the lines that says what direction you should follow. And there's usually a question inside the diamond that says, like, is the process successful, for example? Yes, you move on to the next step. No, you don't. You go back and start again. Could be something like that. So let's go ahead and take a look at one. So here is an example of ordering food at Panera Bread. So we have our entry into the process, the double arrow. Then we have our oval, which is our actual start of the process. So person enters Panera Bread. Then we have our arrow indicating the flow of this process. And then wait in line. I guess it's lunchtime. A lot of people are ahead of you. So you wait with the triangle. And then once you're done waiting, your cashier takes your order. So we have the arrows indicating here. But check it out here. The cashier, I'm sorry, I didn't notice it didn't move forward. So I'll start again. So we have the double arrow into entering Panera, which is an oval. And then we have a single arrow to the wait in line. And then we have a single arrow into the cashier takes the order. So when we look at this, the cashier takes the order. We have two directions that this process goes. One goes to the kitchen. Cook prepares the order. But then we have a line for essentially you. You sit down and wait. And they should have proofread it because it's sit down and wait instead of waits. Gotta love the publishers. But anyway, so we have two things going on. So we have two activity lines here, or two processes going on. So the cook is making the order. But then the waiter brings the order to you. And since you're sitting and waiting, you now move to the oval, signifying the end of this process, end of this process map. Customer enjoys meal. Hopefully, you pick some good food. I like, what's it, broccoli and cheese soup that they have? Yeah, that's my favorite. You might like the sandwiches. Anyway, but you see how this process map is. It's just like a standard flow chart. Not any different. We're just using some generic symbols here. Now, if you move into a company that uses different symbols, use their symbols. But these are the generic ones that are used by probably 75% of the companies out there. All right. Let's move on to bottleneck analysis. All right. And okay. All right, so we're going to use that process we just talked about, okay? All right, so that process we just talked about. Getting our food at Panera Bread. Since I've already gone over it, I'm not going to talk about it again. All right? But let's go ahead and look at activity times. Because did you notice that there's times here? We have 8 minutes, 2 minutes, 9.5 minutes. On the cook side, there's 8 minutes and 1.5 minutes. So we can look at those activity times compared to our target times. For example, the target is waiting in line only 3 minutes. However, you waited in line 8 minutes. Cashier takes your order. Here, the target is 3 minutes, but they were faster. It only took 2 minutes. The cook prepares the order. The cook, it took 8 minutes when the target is 4. And we can go through each one of these so we can find the bottleneck. But at the end, we see that our target is 20 minutes, and what we actually experienced was 20 minutes. So we're right on target there. However, we have some bottlenecks, don't we? So our bottlenecks on a chart like this, it's pretty easy to see the bottlenecks. And I'll give you a hint. There's 3 bottlenecks here. When we're looking at it, anything above the target can be considered a bottleneck. But which one do you start with first, right? Which one? Well, you can start with any of them really, but think about what is actually impacting the customer. Which one do you think here is going to impact the customer the most? If it was me, I'd be looking at the cook prepares the order, because the cashier is taking the order fast. And if the cook prepares the order faster, that means the customer wait time is less, right? So you're knocking out 2 things with one fix. Because if you can bring that 8 minutes down to 4, you are really actually going to be cutting down the 9.5 minutes of waiting. You're going to take 4 minutes off that. So you're going to bring that down to 5.5. So you took essentially 8 minutes off the entire process. Do you follow me on that? Now, waiting in line, well, the cashier is already a minute faster than the target. So with that, I mean, maybe to cut down on the waiting in line, you need 2 cashiers. But think about that. If you do that, then you got to also think about the consequences of some of these decisions. You have twice as many orders coming in now. Can your cook keep up with twice as many orders? Because if you eliminate the waiting in line bottleneck by adding another cashier, now your bottleneck is your cook, because the cook has now twice as much work, which means customers will sit and wait longer. And you might have maybe some effect on your waiter bringing the order, but hospitality and tourism folks, this information is something you guys would really know about because you're looking at these. All right. So this is step 2 of a bottleneck. I kind of ran through the target values because it shows it our target values, and you can determine what your target values should be based on customer surveys, maybe some focus groups. I'm pretty sure most of you guys have noticed that McDonald's has 2 windows or 2 places to place an order now, but it goes into one line. So instead of the order taking process actually being the bottleneck, they have 2 spots to take the order. And they're just about as fast as they were before on the taking your money and giving you your food. So they kind of did a bottleneck analysis, noticing it was the actual placement of the order in drive-thru that was the bottleneck. So now there's 2 lanes essentially to place the order. Now, we also have to look at the impact of the bottleneck, and I believe I talked about that. So we want to look at the overall process, and then we need to look at those negative impacts. If a customer is waiting in line for 8 minutes, what can happen during those 8 minutes? The customer may walk out, so you don't get the sale. If they sit too long, for example, because their order is taking that much longer, well, they may be irritated. They may not want to come back because of the experience they had. All these things happen. Well, I mean, think about it. If you sat in line for 8 minutes, or stood in line for 8 minutes, and then you waited for 9.5 minutes for your food, and what would you do? I mean, you're the best person to know what you would do. You're a customer, right? I'm sure you've had this experience. Well, here, Panera Bread, actually, looking at the way they got this, they're counting time from you walk in the door to when you receive your food. I think that's a very good start and end of their process. And they can make a lot of changes to make the process better and more streamlined. So this is part of that process improvement once you know all that. Here's another example of Panera Bread. You can pick up your order ahead. If they have a drive-through, they have the outside ordering. Well, so you can order online. See how the process works here. And this is just adding an online order option to the already established come inside and order, or a drive-through ordering if the place has it. So yeah, excuse me. So there's a lot of opportunity out here. All right, so that is, that's topic 6. This video, let's see, how much time have I taken? I'm talking, 47 minutes. All right, I'm going to make this real quick. If you have questions about process design and how to improve the process, feel free to send me an email. We can do some office hours. I don't mind. Send me an email. I can reply by email. Reach out, and I'm available for you guys. So I will be announcing an extra credit opportunity next week, and I hope you guys will be excited about it, because I want you guys to be creative with it. It's going to be worth 3%, so I can add 3% to your final course grade. And also midterm grades are going to be coming out soon. And I don't want anybody to get worried about their midterm grade, because the grading is only 1/3 of the class so far. So we still have a lot of time to increase the grades. However, I don't take it personally if you choose to continue with the class or not. Let me know. I'll help you the best I can. And, like I said, reach out to me if you need to. I know this is an online class, and a lot of you did not want to take an online class, but it's a required class and you want to keep progressing on your degree. I understand that. I'd rather be in a classroom talking to you guys, because as you see, I can talk a lot. All right. So I'm going to cut it short here. Well, not short. It's kind of long now, but I'm going to cut it here, and I hope you guys have a great day and a great weekend. All right. Take it easy.